At the time of the Christchurch earthquake in September 2010, I was the Chief Executive Officer of the Women's Refuge in Christchurch. So the first refuge to be established in Christchurch and the largest operating. We saw an immediate increase in the number of women accessing our service after the earthquakes.
The reasons why there is an increase is that we know that after or during the natural disaster, men and women go into their very stereotypical roles. So women will go and we'll do the sandwiches, we'll grab the kids, we'll look after the dogs and the pets. We'll go into that sort of protecting, I suppose, and nurturing role and looking after role. Usually everybody else bar ourselves. And men end up going back into very traditional roles of protecting and providing. And what happens there is those roles are so extreme that and what we expect of men and women is very gendered and very separate, and women go into nurturing roles and men go into protecting. And what happens after that is that men don't know how to cope with that trauma, and they're not taught to actually talk about it and relate well after that. So that's where we see an increase of I suppose abuse and violence within those intimate partner relationships. We know that the determinants of violence against women, and particular intimate partner violence, is that it's really about men's sense of entitlement and about a rigid belief in gender role separation. Men are to be doing this and tough and protectors, and women are to be in the kitchen and doing those type of nurturing roles.
How I saw domestic violence play out in our street, and how we were powerless to change it and powerless even to be able to engage the services that were required to support the families that were struggling with domestic violence.
In families too, aggression and violence increased, triggered, though not caused, by the disaster. After all, only some men choose violence. Two men spoke with a depth of feeling about domestic violence. Rod told of his efforts to protect his daughter and grandchildren.
The police were called on numerous occasions. The police were very understanding, much more so than I think he perhaps deserved. We thought he might top the lot of them. There were times I felt threatened because he's built like a brick toilet, and I was always aware that if he did decide to take a swing, there'd be absolutely no question that he'd flatten me with one punch.
And Paul referred to his street, replete with domestic violence, and of his frustration with the lack of intervention from police and community services, noting in particular an 8-week gap between referral and response to the violence.
Violence against women is one disaster that men can prevent.
I think it's all of us as any community, we need to all be aware of what the local services can offer and how to actually respond. We need to stop actually putting it under the carpet, and we need to actually identify it when we see it. And I think training for those responders, those first responders, before a natural disaster even occurs is really, really important in identifying. And obviously it's also important to make sure that the family violence services actually know that they are going to see an increase after a natural disaster, and what are they going to do to actually meet that need. The Family Violence After Natural Disaster training package that we developed is really for emergency service staff, Red Cross workers, volunteers, community members, caseworkers who potentially will be going into these communities after a natural disaster. And they're the ones that can actually identify family violence and make sure that there's a conduit about who the local services are, and when people are in a crisis, who can they ring, which is really important information that women and children and men need.